It's our pleasure to welcome you to the UKRAINETT research seminar that is titled How Not to Study a War-Affected Society, Challenges of Knowledge Production in Ukraine and Elsewhere. And today we are honored to have Professor Oksana Mikheieva as our speaker. My pleasure, Oksana. For those joining us for the first time, UKRAINETT is a network for researchers and experts in Norway with a keen interest in and extensive knowledge about Ukraine. And as a part of our regular activities, we conduct seminars to discuss various topics focusing on Ukraine and its society. And this is the second time, if I'm right, we have the privilege of hosting Professor Oksana Mikheieva during our seminars. So I can say a few words about Oksana. She is a professor in the sociological department at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. And she left Donetsk in 2014, and since that time she has conducted numerous studies on various groups affected by the war, including internally displaced persons, but also members of voluntary military formations, volunteers, and other groups affected by the war. And today, Professor Mikheieva will share her personal experiences of conducting research during the war and the intricacies of knowledge production in war-affected societies and the ethical and methodological challenges that researchers face in this work. And I know that Oksana, commonly with Victoria Sereda, has published an article, and she is going to present the key findings from this article. What's about the main topic and the question that we're going to discuss today? What difficulties and challenges arise from this perspective when we are researching war-affected societies? What obstacles do researchers encounter at every stage, from research design to the presentation of findings? And where do we face ethical tensions, and how can they be mitigated? And these are the questions that we expect that we will explore today with Oksana Mikheieva. So I propose that Oksana takes approximately 30 minutes for her presentation, and after that we will open the floor to questions from the audience. So you may raise your hand, or you also can write your comments or questions in the chat. Yes, so I think that we can begin, and dear Oksana, the floor is yours.
Yes, Alexandra, thank you so much for this kind introduction, and I'm absolutely happy to be here. It's really my second time in this collaboration, and it's a very big pleasure for me. And today, yes, I will talk about how to research society during the war, or how not to study society, how we write in our article. And let me 1 second, I want to share my screen. I think it will be, yeah. Yeah. Let's start. First of all, I want to invite you to read our full article. Thank you, Alexandra, you mentioned it, that with Victoria Sereda, my colleague Victoria Sereda, we write this article, How Not to Study a War-Affected Society. And today I will talk about maybe some points. It's not possible to cover all questions which we raise in this article, and why I cordially invite you to read the full text. And I'm absolutely happy to see here Svetlana Babenko and Svetlana Odinets, with whom we discuss many of these issues in personal discussion. And I hope today we back to our discussion and maybe find something new, because in my presentation you find maybe more questions than answers, because here we are talking about the very difficult and very problematic things. I want to start from some ideas which connected to quantitative method, or using quantitative method when we try to study society in the situation of occupation or during the time of the war. First of all, we change with the absolutely huge demographical changes on this territory. And very often we have not access to a clear data about people who stay on this territory. I know this very well from my experience when we start our first collection of in-depth interview in the end of 2014. It was very difficult for us to find clear and accurate information about the number of people who stay on occupied territory, who moved to different districts in Ukraine, and very often these data are very manipulative. And it was clear in the beginning of the Russian aggression in 2014. We see how each side tried to use this data for showing that people choose one or other side. And unfortunately, here we have not access to accurate data about people. And here we face with the problem that random or systematic sample may be chosen like some solution in these conditions, but under the conditions of fair or limited access to the population on the temporarily occupied territories, it was very dangerous for interviewers and, of course, for participants in this research. Another possible solution and another possible technique which might be used in this situation would be telephone interview based on random sampling. But this type of interview is safer for participants and for interviewers, because in this case, first of all, protected, of course, interviewers, because it's not required travel to war-torn territories. However, it's still very dangerous for our participants. If we talk about the phone calls can be hacked and voice recorded and matched with the SIM card data. We know this example. I hope all my colleagues know about this, because it was the records of the interview conducted by FCOM, which were hacked and then shared via social networks, and then Ukrainian Pravda published all these records. And on the one hand, it was very interesting to see this conversation between person who live on occupied Crimea Peninsula. It was very specific conversation with interviewer, and it was absolutely clear that people give an answer which they think the interviewer expect. But in the middle of this interview, person starts saying the truth, and it was very, very interesting to look on the process of this interview. But on the other hand, from the ethical point of view, it's absolutely horrible situation when interview person person knows that it's anonymized regime, but unfortunately it was published and shared among the wide audience. Then, if we talk about this telephone call interview, it's very difficult to build a deep and trust relationship through an impersonal telephone call. And it's difficult to expect that our participants would be ready to give unconventional answer during the telephone conversation, because it's really not personal contact. And why, for example, when we think what is better solution in such situation, and very often in literature you find that qualitative paradigm are much more better, and here we talk about in-depth interview, where we have a face-to-face conversation, a very protected space, very safety space, and it's absolutely other situation. But try to imagine this telephone call to the occupied territory when people live in danger, when they know that they might be under repression and detention, etc., etc. It's very, very difficult to organize this trust conversation using the telephone call. And then the other which are related to the problem with access to the field. Very often people who live on occupied territory know this very well from the situation after 2014 on occupied parts of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. Many people change their SIM cards, and one part of the population start using the local SIM cards, but still have these cards which give them access to Ukrainian territory. And it was a very different group of population. And here we face with the question with whom we are talk and with who give us the information about what's going on this territory. Unfortunately, because we have some limitation in the access to the audience. Then another possible solution is to conduct face-to-face interviews through the trust networks following the quota or snowball technique with anonymized questionnaires, but this technique might lead to bias in the sample. And it's a very classical question how to avoid this creating of bubble of group of people under the study. And here we're faced with the number problem too, because our participants might be afraid that they have been contacted not by researchers, but by military or secret services, checking their loyalty, and it's absolutely real situation, and this happens very often. And this might influence their openness, especially with regard to sensitive question. Another problem is that under such conditions, it is impossible to perform a routine quality control procedure of the field work. And in Ukraine, we know several cases, and people were asked about these procedure of conducting research on occupied territory, and of course then about the control, how it's possible. And usually this very routine procedure of quality control on occupied territory performed in the very dangerous procedures for people who did this control on the ground. Then, survey give us a distribution of answer to the question, which is already more or less established in public opinion. But when we study society in the situation of the war, in the process of the war, when we study society under occupation, we are talking about people who are not understand what's going on around them. They have not clear answer on this very complicated question. And here we face with other problem. We are talking about situation when people face with the repression, when people face with the torture, when they find themselves on occupied territory, and it's not about free speech, it's not about free media, it's not about the real public opinion on this territory and what we collect in this sense if we collect this data. Then the situation in the war zone, occupied territories, is that active conflict characterized by higher level of dynamics and significant level of uncertainty. And this create this environment on uncertainty for people, and it's very difficult for them to give a correct answer to the question. Therefore, neither the sociologist can formulate the questions that are settled or finalized, nor the respondent able to provide clear answer which located in the heart of the uncertain situation. And for example, yesterday I read a very interesting discussion which organized by UNET, and a group of my colleagues discussed this slow producing of knowledge. Unfortunately, here in this situation, we produce knowledge very quickly, and it's not about situation when we have enough time to reflect what happens with us, what happens in this situation. And it's not only about our participants, it's about researcher too. We need to have a time. We need to have a time for thinking, we need to have a time for reflecting, but unfortunately in this situation, very often we collect a very big reaction of people, which is their reaction on something from their environment. And moreover, having a clear position in such conditions can pose a direct threat to their life, I mean our participants. But it does not mean that quantitative studies are not possible in war zone. But employing it one has to understand all the limitation with sampling, response rate, the dangers of the fieldwork, and the limits to which issues can be discussed without putting respondents in a life-threatening situation. Very often in literature, we can find that qualitative paradigm or qualitative method pass much more better in such situation and are more relevant to these conditions. Of course, we are talking about very flexible methods which give us the opportunity to follow the respondent, to change the tools during the interview. Very often we conduct several interviews and we make some changes in tools, and it really give us the opportunity to follow the situation and to follow our participants. But at the same time, it poses some question about safety of the research and research participants in the same situation. If we need to have this face-to-face contact, it's very dangerous for both sides of the conversation. And we have many examples of this because, for example, after 2014, maybe Ukrainians not recognize the level of dangerous like it happens after 2022, and why people mostly agree to participate in some research, but they face with a different kind of very dangerous situation, and we know these examples of such situation in our field, Ukrainian field, especially if we talk about this study with people who represent occupied territory, who represent gray zone, etc., etc. It encourages reflection on the influence of researchers. It's other very interesting aspects because very often, and we often discuss this issue, that the content on interview depends on how our participants identify interviewers, and different interviewers collect a little bit different results because these expectations play a very important role in conversation. And this influence of researcher are very important. And for example, in many of our research, we invite many different people who conduct interview. And these give us the opportunity to mitigate some limitations in the content of interviews. Then, in thinking about the study design, we need to keep in mind difficulties in finding study participants and their availability and the reasons for agreeing to participate. It's a very important question because we usually communicate with people who agree to give us the interview, but we don't know anything about the other group of people who don't want to participate. What's their motivation? Why they rejected to participate in interview? And on the other hand, it's very interesting why people agree to participate in this interview. On the one stage of collecting data, according to my feeling, it happens maybe in 2016, 17, Ukrainian researchers start asking why you agree to participate. In interview, it was very, very interesting solutions, and it gives us the opportunity to check the motivation of people, and many of them present their position like a mission because they want to inform the world, Ukrainian society, other people about what's going on, what's happened with them, etc., etc. And it really presented like a mission. It was very important for them to say about this, but it's still very important to know about the other group of people who keep silent, who don't want to talk about their perception of situation, about their experience. And from my point of view, it's not only about their trauma, it's not only about that they are traumatized and don't want to participate and protect themselves from re-traumatization, but it's many other motives why people don't want to participate in interview. Then collective form of flexible methodology, we talk about this still about qualitative method. And for example, focus group, dyadic interview are very problematic when we talk about occupied territory or war-torn areas, because here we are talking about situation with very high level of dangerosity for people who participate in this. People may face denunciations, they live under condition of distrust of anyone in their immediate surrounding, and they therefore may perceive other participants like a potential threat. It's example for you. I was one of the reviewer of this report, and we have a very active discussion with my colleague who prepared this report. And we discussed this issue connected to the using the focus group discussion like a method in communicating with people who live on occupied territory or in gray zone. And as you can see here, one of the quote from this focus group discussion prove my positions. Participant says, people are afraid. Residents of the Republic and the Gray Zone have post-traumatic stress disorder. Very deep down fear that they will come, find out, and punish. And here, participants say directly to researchers, it's not possible. We have not any chance to say truth during the focus group discussion because we all afraid to be punished in this situation. Then, if we talk about other problems and issue in data collection, it's very important to remember about problem of storing and protecting the collected data. We collect so many information now during all of this period, starting in 2014 and before present day, so many collections, but it's very important question, how we protect our participants. Very often we promised that everything will be anonymized, that everything will be protected. I understand how it's worked, for example, if research represents some structures, universities, and if you represent some kind of system, or structure, it's much more easy to have this strong protection of the data. But if you talk about the independent researchers, where we store this data, how we protect this information, it's a very, very important information. It's a very important problem which need to be solved in the process. In whole my career, I have only one example when I face with absolutely strong and brilliant protection of the data. It was my collaboration with PAX. It's a peacemaking organization from the Netherlands, and it was protection of the data during the whole period of conducting research. I have their laptop, professional laptop, with a series of paroles, and then when I conduct an interview, I upload this interview on the server of the organization and have nothing on my laptop. It was absolutely brilliant protection of the data, but unfortunately, it's only one example from whole my career, and I think it's a very important problem, and we need to maybe collectively thinking how to solve this problem with storing and protecting data. Now we collect so much, but unfortunately, it's not so good protected how it's must be. Then it is important to remember that the recording have identifiable voices, and it's a really very easy to identify person. It's other example from my personal experience when I invite interviewers to collect data for me with IDPs in Kyiv. In that moment, I was in Lviv. And when I receive the transcript of this interview, I identify all person from Donetsk, because I'm originally from Donetsk. And I see a small personal details, which I know. And it was really very easy for me to identify these people without any personal information. And why I know this very well. Unfortunately, it's really easy to identify a person, especially if you talk about their biography, about their previous period of life on this territory, etc., etc. And it's give us enough information for this process of identification of the person. Then, these challenges must encourage researchers to work with the expert in the field of information technology. Of course, I'm totally recognize my limitation. I don't know so many nuances which are connected to the different kind of technical moments which are very important in this case, and why we need to have a wide collaboration with the specialists in different fields. For example, here I'm talking about experts in the field of information technology, but from my point of view, it's very important now to have such collaboration with experts who represent their psychological knowledge. It's very important to have the contacts with person who represent the other fields which now are really very, very important for understanding how not only collect data and how to analyze this data. And for example, after my first collection of in-depth interview in 2014, I tried to find some social demographic parameters which give me an understanding why people choose one or other side. But unfortunately, I'm found nothing in this situation. And why I understand that, for example, a social psychologist will be very useful in this situation. And we need to invite them not only on the stage of development tools, not only for helping during the fieldwork stage, but on the stage of analyzing the results of interview. Then, the other problems and issue which we could face during the field work stage, first of all, it's gaining permits and access to some territory. Very often, if we talk about the occupied territory, or we talk about this gray zone, the territory which are very close to war zone conflict, we understand that some people control this area, and we need to receive some permits and receive this access to the territory, but it creates a dependence of the decision of these people who control this territory. And unfortunately, it's a very big issue for autonomous position of the researcher in the field. And here we could face with the loyalty control. Here we could face with some kind of dependence of people who give their success to the territory. And of course, for example, here on this slide, you see my photos. It was in 2018, and I was on the 0 point. It's territory between Stanitsa Luganskaya and Lugansk. It's a 0 point between the occupied territory and controlled by Ukrainian government territory. And as you can see here, we are talking about the bad roads, we are talking about the destroyed infrastructure, and everything this creates many problems for researchers who need to act according to some procedures, according to the logic of the research, etc., etc. And here, for example, very actively communicate with international organizations who monitor the situation and can provide information about the level of danger. Then I want to add to our article, because it's my last experience, it's my very fresh experience. This year, I was involved in the big project with Save the Children. And it was a very big challenge for me how to work with the children audience. Very often when we talk about the experience of the war, we are talking about the adults. All our research started from the age of 18, because it's officially possible in Ukrainian state. It's possible to conduct an interview or conduct a survey with children, but in this case, you are obligated to receive informed consent from the parents of the children. And here we work with the two groups of children. First group was 10-14 years, and then 15-17 years. Two groups of children. And first challenge for me was how to develop a tool for children, because it's not possible to use a standard standard procedures with them. We need to find some solutions, how to involve them in a game, how to use a different kind of projective method, how to use a different kind of game method for involving them in conversation, and how to organize this conversation with protecting them from re-traumatization. And in this case, we were very careful in conversation with children. We start our conversation with parents. Parents gave informed consent for their children to participate in focus group. The children themselves, it was a separate conversation with children, and they also were asked if they wanted to participate. Then children know that they could refuse to participate in any stage of our conversation. Then first, parents were also informed that they could request the deletion of the data provided by their children at any time before the results were published. And parents were also provided with information about the possible risk of participation for their children: discomfort, painful memories, loss of time, confidentiality, and explanation of how we mitigate this risk. It was very, very important part of all of these procedures in communicating with our participants. But the same logic I use in my previous research, for example, when I conduct this in-depth interview in the 0 point in 2018, and part of my participants were people who came from occupied territory. And in this case, I started our conversation only when I started our conversation only after minimum half an hour conversation about these possible risks. And only after that, we signed this informed consent, because it's my part of responsibility. People very often don't know anything about possible consequences of this communication, and why it's a responsibility of the researchers to inform people about whole procedures, about whole stages of research, how this data will be collected, how this data will be protected, how many people will have access to this data, etc., etc., etc. And we talk about these risks, we talk about these possible consequences of this communication, and only after that I invite people to write this, to sign this informed consent. And other aspect, it's conducting research in the occupied territory. I told about this, but last year we in ASA, my very, very good team with my colleague Sergei Danilov and Igor Semyovolos, collected an interview with people who had a long period of time living in occupied territories. And here we face with many other issues. For example, first of all, collecting the data in occupied territory possible only if you have a network of trust. If you compare situation in 2014 and now, it's a totally different situation. The level of fear in 2014 was not so high like it's happened right now, because the people face with real torture, people face with a very high level of aggression, and they don't want to communicate with someone whom they did not know directly. Why in this case it's very important to have this trust network. But other side of this problem, how to avoid creating a bubble and how to diversify our participants as such as it possible. For example, in 2014, it was much more easy for me because I personally was from Donetsk, and I have many contacts, and I have these people part of them moved from occupied territory, part of them lived on occupied territory, but they have a contact with me. And it gave me an opportunity to build this trust network and diversify the people whom I invite invite to conversation. But in this case, we solved this problem using the trust networks of my colleague, because after 2014, they actively work in the context of these decentralization processes in the eastern part of Ukraine and southern part of Ukraine. And why they have so many different contacts in small villages and the middle cities, and we still have this personal contact, but very diversified. And in this way, we try to avoid this problem of creating a bubble of our participants. Then, still here we have this problem, whose voice are represented, who agree to give an interview and who remain silent. And we absolutely understand our limitation in this situation, because we mostly talk with people who have pro-Ukrainian position. And it's absolutely impossible to have an access to people who represent the other side of conflict, who represent the pro-Russian position on occupied territory, because they don't want to communicate with people whom they identify in such way. Then, here we face with this asymmetry in research participant relationship. It's still about this infirm concern. People do not understand the consequences. People do not understand the implications, and why it's our responsibility to talk about this in very detailed way. And the same problem about storing the data and protecting the data, especially in this case, because it's very dangerous for people who are not so protected. In our research with people who had an experience living under occupation, we choose the strategy that we talk only with people who, after half a year or 1 year living under occupation, moved to Ukraine. And it's absolutely our limitation in this case. We are talking only with people who are in safety, who are protected, who moved to Ukrainian territory. And we are talking mostly with people who have pro-Ukrainian and partially neutral position in this conflict. But here we recognize our limitation, we know our limitation, and when we build our analysis, we build this analysis basing of understanding of our limitation. And last several points about researchers' positions and now in articles very often we could find information about such issue like positionality of researchers, who we are, how we related to the conflict, what our positions towards the conflict, what's the distance between us and the situation, etc., etc. And here we faced with a number of problems. First of all, very often when we talk about this positionality of researcher, it's a common perception that institutions or independent researchers who are external, who have a big distance between institution and situation, are usually perceived like more neutral and more trustworthy. But for me, it's a very big question, and maybe solution here when we start with our positionality and when we show our distance between us and the situation under the study. Then, the next one connected to this problem of hierarchies of researchers. Very often when we talk about this external or internal, but with Victoria we prefer use the other terminology and talk about native and non-native researcher, which from our point of view much more correct in this situation. And when we talk about this native and non-native researcher, we're still talking about some hierarchies, when very often people who are non-native, who represent the other countries, very often have not access to the field and use native researcher for collecting data. And it's creates this hierarchies between researchers. Very often, for example, non-native researcher produce a theoretical framework, but native researcher involved only on the field stage and not actively involved in producing theories. Then I told about this. I told about this trust network. It's really very, very important, but it creates the other dangerous for native researchers, because of course native researchers have these trust networks, but on the other hand, it's a very difficult to avoid labeling, because our participants in one or other way try to put our positions in such schemes. They ask us about who we are, why we conduct the research, identify us in some way. And it's very difficult to avoid these things. And of course, their interview totally depends how our participants identify us in the process of interviewing. Then, local knowledge is very important at the stage of reading different jargonism, specific words, and many other things. Very often people who have a big distance between territory under the conflict, between countries, they are not able to read everything that people saying here, because people very often use the local language. They very actively use some kind of jargonism, some words from the social media, which everybody knows in this circle, but unfortunately it's not readable for people who come from the big distance. Then, a great degree of contextualized knowledge is necessary for interpretation of such research outcomes. If you are not speaking local language, unfortunately, many things are not saying you anything in this situation. Then we face with a conflict of roles, very different kind of conflict of roles. For example, our participants might be, perceive us like mediator, like people who could help them, or maybe like representative of security services, etc., etc. And why it's so important to have this pre-conversation stage when we create this high level of trust and when we represent our positions for our participants in this situation. But it's not only about this conflict of role in perception of us, but from the other side, it's our internal conflict, for example. I told about this neutrality, and from my point of view, it's impossible to be neutral if you are part of the path of the events. And here we very often we faced with the problem of internal conflict between researcher and citizen. For example, as a researcher, I'm obligated to be neutral, I'm obligated to be under the conflict, etc., etc., but I act as a citizen. It's part of my life. It's part of my everyday. And in this situation, it's very difficult to me to be neutral and under the conflict, because I'm not only researcher, I am a citizen of this country, and this conflict are very strong. And then last 2 points connected to the logic of dissemination results. Here we faced many problems too, from my point of view, because, for example, we usually need to know what information we share and what way, because some of this information might be very dangerous in war situation. And it's other conflict, which are very close to this conflict between researcher and citizen, when I obligated to decide how to present my results, how to be very careful in presenting of these results, because we are dealing with a very complex situation of war, occupation, etc., and we need to remember that protection of our participants and the adequate perception of the situation play a very important role in such conditions. And of course, as a researcher, we may face a pressure from some social and political groups who try to censor information on the conflict. But it's on the one hand, it's about dissemination of results, but on the other hand, it's about this conflict, internal conflict between researchers and citizens. And thanks so much. I say a little bit more than
yes. Thank you, Oksana. I decided not to interrupt you. So, but we still have some time for the questions. So I open the floors to the questions. Please, dear colleagues, who would like to ask Oksana? Yes, Svetlana, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Oksana, for your presentation. It resonates a lot and it provokes a lot of thoughts. And as you said, this conversation started not today. I have two short comments, reflections, probably questions, like all together. Yes. Like I like your idea, your main idea that we need to think about our methodological tool when we're making our decision to study war-torn societies or people under occupation. And of course, we have this dilemma, this ethical dilemma. I think quite deep dilemma between knowledge production and our responsibility as researchers for knowledge production, because we are supposed to produce the knowledge, yes. And other side, it's about people who live in the situation where violation of human rights are extremely terrible. So we are not talking just about some violations of rights. Yes, we are talking about the most extreme cases that probably we can somehow imagine. Yes, and when we talk about this methodological tool that we have as researchers that had been formulated in quite cozy environments, in quite cozy armchairs, yes, in situations when we studied peace societies, yes, societies under peace conditions. And when we go with these tools, even if we think about all these things that you mentioned, yes, we promise our researchers, our participants to protect them, we promise to anonymize them. But my question is whether all these tools are enough. Because even if we promise all of this, we are not there. We don't have any idea what is really going there in that minute or the next minute. Yes, we don't have any contact with those who occupy these territories. Yes, so I think that when we talk about like how people understand the situation when they make their decision about participation or not in our project, I think we also need to ask ourselves if we as researchers have enough knowledge and understanding how we can somehow deal with the situation. So my question is, how responsible is to study, for example, occupied territories in Ukraine today? Is it still worth to do, or we need to somehow withdraw and just wait? So this is like open question. And then very short commentary about your data protection moment, like the data protection discussion. So I think that we need to think about knowledge production again in hierarchies that you mentioned, because it's not only about to somehow to create safe place in Western university and to send all the data from Ukraine to Western university. Yes, but it's also a question that this data should be also set in Ukrainian academic intellectual space. Yes, so this is another very important topic, I think, because we are talking about like protection outside Ukraine, but it's a question if this very valuable information that we gather, that we collect under such conditions, just are sent to another university. I mean, and we don't know, we don't have any impact after that. Yes, we can probably stop our contract there, and we can probably, just be fired from this university. And what next? Yes, what next? Who is responsible for this data? which we collected under such horrible situation and under such horrible conditions. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this question. It's very, very well resonates to something about what I think every day, absolutely every day, because we still collect this interview with people who have an experience to be on occupied territory. And it's a main question that I ask myself. And now, for example, with my colleague Elinada Grinchenko, she represents the oral history, and I work like a sociologist, and we try to compare these approaches from oral history and sociological tools or approaches. And now I start to understand many very important things. For example, when we collect this interview with people who are in safety, who are protected, who came from occupied territory to Ukraine, I never collect data on occupied territory because I recognize how dangerous it's for people here. But in this case, I totally understand that people who agree to give us the interview, they don't need any tools from our side, because it's about stories, it's about telling story. Our question not play a very important role in the interview, because it's very important for these people to tell their story. And they really see emissions because they want to inform everyone about everything what happens on occupied territory. And maybe it's answer to your question about this tool. Normal tools are not working in this situation. Of course, we prepared some guides, but it's for nothing. Because people told about their stories. And it's other side of the issue, how to analyze everything, because we receive a very different, on the one hand, but on the other hand, very similar stories from occupied territory. And this similarity gives us the opportunity to analyze this, to code the information, etc., etc. But it's still a question for me. And the other aspect of the question, what we collect when we collect data immediately in the context of the war. I'm not only sociologist, I'm historian, and I'm totally understand that if we want to collect experiences, not reactions, we need to have a distance between us and event. And why, for example, when we discussed this issue with Gelinada Grinchenko, we talked about this, the logic of collecting data from the point of oral history. It's collecting data after 20, 30 years after event. And it's really about reflection. It's really about experience. But what we collect when we collect data right now in the context of the war, immediately after person moved from occupied territory to this. It's not an in-depth interview. It's not a classical in-depth interview. And other question, other maybe element of this question, which are very important for me, after many years of collecting data with IDPs, I formulated for me, I think, a good formula. If you have an opportunity not collect interview, stop on this. Because very often it's collection for collection. That's not for understanding what's going on, etc., etc. And I think it's very important to understand when we need to stop in this collection of data. It's a part of our responsibility, and it's a part of ethical approach to this issue too. And data protection, I absolutely agree with you. And I talked about these hierarchies, I talked about this problem. But on the other hand, it's still in comparison with oral history, because oral history usually talk about people who won't be named because they tell a story for the next generation. But when we talk about the different kind of sociological methods, people prefer to be to talk in anonymous format and prefer have a confidential conversation. And how to be in this situation, how to deal with this problem if their interview are stored in different structures, and as we promise, the limited number of researchers will have access, but we don't know what's happened then. after 5 years, after 10 years with this interview, and what will be the destiny of this interview in the future. I'm absolutely agree with you. It's a very big question for me too. And why I asking about how it's possible to protect not only data, but people who give this data. Yes.
Thank you, Oksana. Thank you, Svetlana. And Svetlana, please, your question, the last one today.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to react to these methodological issues between which I see really crucial in continuing this conversation about oral history and sociology. We have exactly a strong methodological difference. As sociologists, we collect moods and reaction in moment. And it's also a very important part of data that we can rely on, because we cannot collect immediate reaction after years. We have this change of even like people who said on exit poll whom they voted for in this exact date. After some time, after a year, they could say very different thing. Changing their mind because they joined the winner or something like that. And also another thing that even for historians, I think the most important source of data is a diary, which people are writing in the moment, because that is less on reflection, but more on their immediate fixing what they think, do, and have in the moment. Therefore, I think that there are a lot of problems with collecting data in the moment, and I agree completely that this panorama that you gave us is really really important and impressive, but still I see it as a part of our mission as a researcher to fix these moments and to save these voices in the moment when they want to be heard. Because those who didn't want to say, they still silent. Maybe in a years they will be ready to say something. But as to now, the voices that want to be announced, we are here to do that, to collect. Thank you. It's not a question, it's just a reaction to the conversation.
Thank you, but I still thinking under it. It's a very big issue for me. I don't know. I have a clear answer to this question, but maybe I'm agree because I'm still collect this data. Maybe I agree that we obligated to do this, especially collecting the data from people who want to share this. And if we go back to this difference between oral history and sociology, I absolutely agree with that we collecting these moods and immediate reaction of people, and it's led to difference in analytical procedures. We are coding these moods, reaction, etc., but when oral historians work with the information, they try to find an answer why people told about this in such way, why they change their mood perception of the situation, and what become a figure of silence in this conversation. Because very often, and historians know this very well, that it's very important to study not only what people say, but what about they don't want say or silent. And it's a difference between oral history perspective and sociological perspective. But this question about collecting data, it's really very open and under the discussion still. On the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, do we really collect information and what to do with this information, especially, for example, if we talk about people who deeply traumatized of the situation, but they want to tell about story. But I'm not sure that it's not very good from the point of view of collecting of information which are necessary for understanding what's going on. It's much more like psychological act. psychological help.
Dear Oksana, dear participants, thank you so much. Dear Oksana, thank you for your presentation and that you have raised a lot of questions that we need to reflect on further. And dear participant, thank you for your reflections that you go further with some of the suggestions and intentions. It was really nice to see you, all of you today, and I would like to thank you for this hour that we had together, and I encourage you to follow up our website, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at our next seminar this year. So thank you so much and see you soon.
And thank you so much from my side.
Bye-bye.